I've not always been organised. But I'm traditionally very disorganised. But I'm starting to get into a rhythm now and coming into my fourth season at Yorkgate. And what I've done is I create an Excel spreadsheet. And actually, I've got a drop-down tab on the Excel spreadsheet, so I can just drop down February. And everything for February is on this list. There's 3 pages for sowing in February. Going back to the Snowdrop, Rosemary Burnham. It's a lovely viridescent one. It's got the green out markings, and it's gone. And it was our favourite Snowdrop last year. It's not a cheap Snowdrop, and it's rotted away. So goodbye, Rosemary. Hopefully we'll get another one somewhere.
Hello and welcome to episode 30 of Talking Dirty. That kind of rhymes. Over at East Ruston Old Vicarage, I think he's got a bit of a Galanthophile glint in his eye this morning. It's Alan Edward Herbert Gray, our happy and snuggled up handsome horticulturalist.
Over in Cambridgeshire on this wonderful sunny morning, we have Thordis Maria Sophia Fredrickson. I have to say, you're looking a tad autumnal today in your lovely toned browns and olive greens. It looks absolutely lovely, but it belies the season because you said talking dirty, and I'm going to say getting flirty because we've got not one, but we've got 2 fabulous Galanthophiles or files.
We're all a little bit overexcited today because this is the first podcast when we've invited 2 people along. So who knows how many hours we'll be talking, particularly when we introduce our guests. They are Galanthophiles. They are also just fantastic folk. So no stranger to the podcast. I think her 3rd appearance. It's Val Bourne. A Galanthophile, of course, also a brilliant garden writer, an organic gardener, an all-round great gal. And also, it's like in the red corner, in the blue corner, we have got Brian Ellis, who, although you've not been on the podcast, boy, oh boy, have we mentioned you a lot. And we've seen some of your beautiful pictures on the screen in the video version of the podcast as well. You are a Galanthophile, or as your email signature says, a Galanthofool.
Yes, there's a lot of us about, I'm afraid.
And Brian, do you have a middle name to bring to the party?
Well, I do, and I know you'd love it to be Aloysius or something like that, but it's Edward.
Oh, another Edward.
Yes.
So the reason we thought we would invite 2 guests on is so that we could just have a big old Galantha loving. Galanthophiles, obviously, lovers of snowdrops. There are plenty of you about, and this really is the season to get overexcited about snowdrops. I am, however, feeling a touch guilty because prior to commencing recording this podcast, we've been talking about the hatred of having to cut snowdrops out of the garden. And Brian, this is the first time you've cut little snowdrops entirely for our benefit.
I have got vases of them. I've got containers of them.
Oh,
they're beautiful.
I mean, we have got dozens of snowdrops around your screen, around your room, Brian.
Yes, well, the others are in pots, like this dear little thing here, which is a lagodechianus, which is a species from the Caucasus, I think, or around the Black Sea somewhere. I lose track because there are now about 20 odd species. And they all sort of came from that area, didn't they, Val?
They did.
But
Think Eurovision Song Contest.
Yes.
Mordovia, Herzegovina, and all that sort of stuff.
Yes.
So we will take quite the tour of your Galanthus over the next hour or so. But I would love to know how you all caught the bug. So Val, we've obviously heard you talk about snowdrops and seen them in your podcast before. But when did it all start for you with snowdrops?
Well, it started in the mid-90s when I was still teaching, and I read a book by Christopher Brickell that mentioned a snowdrop called S. Arnott being a giant snowdrop and honey scented. And I tracked some down and bought some. And I became interested in snowdrops. And there are quite a few churchyards in Oxfordshire where I was living then. So I would go to places like Dunge Chew and look at the snowdrops. And they had plicatus there and Elwesii there, as I remember. And I just got interested then. And then after Primrose Warburg died, I was the Oxford Times and Mail gardening correspondent. And after the Primrose died, a man from the RHS invited me to go to Primrose's garden in 1997. I was there at the lunch, and it was a beautiful spring day, and that's when I realized that how beautiful they were. And John Grimshaw, a lovely man, gave me 5 or 6 different snowdrops. So I went to this snowdrop lunch at Primrose Warburg's garden. I was invited by a man, I have to say, it was 20 years ago, who did not have snowdrops on his mind. There I will stop. That's how I got into them. And I made these great big labels, wooden labels with the names on. I hammered them in the ground. I could send you a picture of this. And my best beloved Joe said they were like tombstones. That was my introduction. I started off with about 8 in 1997.
So it's the mid-90s for Val. Brian, when did your Galanthophilia begin?
Well, it was only very shortly after that, I think, Val, because we're members of all sorts of gardening clubs. And one visit that the Suffolk Cottage Garden Society, I think it was to go to Rod Leeds' garden. Now, Rod Leeds is an absolutely amazing plantsman. Rod and Jane are lovely. And we were supposed to be going to see his fritillary collection. But unlike this year, it was a late spring, and the snowdrops in the garden were still out, and I just couldn't believe it. I was absolutely gobsmacked. And all the differences in the flower shapes and everything was just amazing. So that sort of woke me up a bit, because I also saw the snowdrop Primrose Warburg, which is a yellow one, and I was staggered to know that there was a yellow one. And then I think it was the same summer, Plant Heritage in Norfolk had dear Richard Hobbs doing a talk on propagating bulbs, which we went to. And of course he propagated a snowdrop.
Yes.
I thought, oh, I'll have a go at that.
Well, I've never done any of that chipping, but I did see I did see Primrose Warburg as it was named, in Primrose's garden in spring 97. And it was against the house wall with a label saying PC. And people thought that might be Phil Cornish, but it wasn't, it was somebody else. And it was decided to name it after her. But I remember seeing it because it was such a perfect day, and the cornus mass was out quite close by, and little bits of the flower had come down and surrounded this lovely yellow snowdrop and sort of framed it. I was terribly lucky to get there.
Oh, yes. It's special, isn't it, when you do things like that? Because I don't think we went last spring when you came over for the lunch at Raveningham.
Yes.
But we used to go to Orchard House as well, which is where Lady Priscilla Bacon retired to. And there we saw where Priscilla Bacon was found. And it's always a bit special for us nuts.
And Alan, I think Brian's alluded there to something that I've lost you so many Saturdays when we used to work together on the radio. I would lose Alan in snowdrop season to a snowdrop lunch. You know, you'd go off to Raveningham Hall or something. And it's a whole part of the process of collecting snowdrops people might not know about, Alan, this sort of wonderful social scene.
Yeah, well, of course, we used to go to John Morley's house, and John is a great Galanthophile aficionado, and he has a lovely garden, and it's in North Suffolk, in actual fact. And we used to start the morning there, and we'd arrive for coffee, and we'd have coffee and chocolate biscuits in this lovely, warm, lovely, very stylish house, I have to say. Yes. And then we'd go and we'd walk through the snowdrop wood, and we'd just look at them all and slava and drool. Enjoying ourselves enormously, and of course we were waving pound notes away all the time, because we were just sort of making notes, because we knew that John was going to send out his list, which he has this year as well. And of course, I have to say that I have I have bought a few, not as many as I perhaps normally do, because it's just one of those things. Once it takes hold of you, it took hold of me, I suppose, maybe in the 1980s, the late 1980s, and it coincided with a private visit to Anglesey Abbey when Richard Ayres was head gardener there. And Richard lived at the village of Lode, and we've probably all been to see Richard's garden when he had snowdrops in it and all the rest of it. And I was a complete, absolute non-believer, non-converted person towards the various types of snowdrops in those days. And I went along to see Richard's garden, and he said, "I'll tell you what," he said, "what are you doing next Tuesday?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. Why?" He said, "Well, if you'd like to come to Anglesey Abbey, I'll show you something secret, but make sure you bring a few brown paper bags with you."
Ooh.
And I said, "Okay."
An invitation.
Yeah, what an invitation.
Awesome.
And anyway,
Is it in case you hyperventilated?
something like that.
Hyperventilating already at the thought of it.
Right.
I went to join Richard together with my friend Val, who was a great friend of his as well, who also came armed with a few brown paper bags. And we embarked along this kind of edge of a spinney. There's a kind of ditch and another hedge on the other side of it. And we went along there, and Richard said, "And this is so-and-so," no labels. Of course, he knew them all. "This is so-and-so. What do you think of that?" I said, "Very nice. Would you like one?" And out came a little fork, loosened the soil underneath, and very gently he teased the bulb out of the soil without wrenching away too many roots, and put it in a bag. And he said, "Now make sure you write on that bag the name and all the rest of it," so which is what I did. And really, that's how I became enchanted with the difference between one snowdrop and another, the various name varieties. And since then, of course, as well, Brian knows only too well, because he tempted me the other day. Well, I was on the radio and he sent me a photograph, and I said, "That's very nice. Will you have a few? If you're a good boy, you might get one later on in the year."
You have to be very good.
It's the people that are so special in snowdrops. And when we used to have the London shows at the Vincent Square in February, it was
I
like
remember
multicultural who's who, and you've got to know these wonderful people, and it was just, the people are just wonderful.
Yeah,
Still the people, you know, I've got snowdrops in the garden that were given to me by various people who are no longer with us, like David Quinton and John Finch and goodness knows who else. And, you know, you think, oh, that's special.
Yes. It's lovely.
it's also a little bit more than that, isn't it? Because I think we become custodians of those snowdrops as well.
Yeah.
Because we make sure that they keep going, and we pass them around to other people, and so then they will live on. I mean, even after we've gone.
I love it when you go in the garden, and I've got quite a lot of my really special ones on raised beds because the drainage isn't so good here. And they do better, and you can say, well, that's Joe Sharman there, that's Phil Cornish there, that's Matt Bishop there, and the people, and that's one of the lovely things about growing snowdrops. And of course, the people that have gone before, like Ruby Baker and Margaret Biddulph.
Yeah. I thought was quite interesting when we went to John Morley's garden, who's the snowdrop aficionado that I mentioned earlier in the program. He actually grows all his young stock in raised beds, and these are either some are seedlings, some are chips, and all the rest of it. But I mean, they are grown in raised beds, presumably in a gritty soil, presumably to keep them from rotting.
Yes,
because his ground is very, very wet. I mean, he quite often, the water table is just below the surface of the ground there.
Right.
Well, my gardens is a sloping garden, a third of an acre, but it goes down to a spring, which is why it's called Spring Cottage. And when I came here, I made the woodland garden at the bottom of the garden. And if I'd known what I know now, I would have made it at the top of the end of the garden. In fact, there's a fruit cage there, and I have ambitions.
I'm sort of almost making the whole garden a woodland garden, much against David's wishes.
Well, this is an interesting point, because I suppose, Val, it doesn't sound like your significant other, your best beloved, is necessarily a Galanthophile. Alan, how much is Graham into snowdrops?
Don't even ask.
Joe's favourite thing, he says two things when I have Snowdrop visitors. He says they're all the same because he knows it will annoy me. And then he mentions the National Collection of White Labels. Really explained to me.
So how much is David a fan of the Snowdrops, Brian?
Well, he's more of a fan than he lets on. You see, David really enjoys photography, which is why we've got some very nice photos of Snowdrops. And so he does the photographing. And when we go to all these meetings and what have you, Val will know what I'm going to say now. We went to Rod Leeds for a Snowdrop lunch once, and he showed me Ursula Buchan's book.
Yes.
And I thought, oh, that's very sensible, because all these people are in the generation that's now gone.
Yes.
And I've never met them. And, you know, they're just names to me. And I'd like to know a bit more about them. Being a teacher, you have to know everything, of course.
Yes. Yes.
And so I then said to David, when we were going to Snowdrop talks and things like that, oh, that's Phil Cornish. You better have a photo of him. Oh, that's Val Bourne. You better take a picture of her.
I know I have a whole section on my computer of Galanthophiles pictures, and
Yes.
I often get a call from somebody saying, have you got a picture? And John Morley asked me for a picture of Ruby, which I had,
Oh,
and
right.
also a picture of Colin, which I had. The person you could never photograph was Veronica Cross.
Ah, but David got one. And
Yes,
he got
but she
her
hated it.
smiling.
Point her camera to Veronica, and
Yeah.
she would either bob down to the ground or go behind a shrub.
Yes. We were at John Morley's, and of course he'd got the long lens on. I shouldn't be telling Alan this because he'll know now. He'd got the long lens on, so he takes candid photos of people at the Snowdrop.
Yes, I know.
It's like a
Very knowledgeable.
Galanthophiles paparazzi.
Yes.
Now, I suppose, I mean, we've talked a lot about the Galanthophiles. I suppose really we should start talking about the Galanthus,
Yes.
especially having made Brian go through the torturous procedure of snipping lots of flowers off his plants yesterday.
Well, yes. Yeah.
This is where I have to say that this morning I went out with a pair of scissors.
Oh, Val.
I went round the garden and thought, no, they'll have to have pictures instead. So I failed. I'm sorry.
Well, I mean, I was going to lift this up earlier, which it hasn't been cut, but this one is
Trumps.
Primrose. No, South Haze.
It's the
South
trouble
Haze.
is with Snowdrops, South Haze. The trouble is with Snowdrops, when you bring them indoors, the shape changes.
Yes.
So
they
in
lift
the
up.
garden, South Haze is quite slender, isn't it?
Yes,
When you bring her
yes,
in,
yes.
she develops skirts. It's another reason why I don't like bringing Snowdrops in, because they take on a different personality.
They all lift their skirts up, apart from some which are sort of very tightly in. But I mean, some of them almost fly. This one is,
Oh.
I'll try and get it still. This one is a green-tipped Elwesii,
Mm.
was called Caucasicus. You see, it should really be like that.
Yes.
So you can see the green tips. But
Brian, I have to tell you that I had from you, I think, a couple of years ago, Galanthus South Haze, and I have to say that it is one of the varieties that increases very freely.
oh, it does.
Yeah, exactly. And this is where I'm just going to make a plea for people that think sometimes that these bulbs are expensive.
No.
Because, you know, they're not expensive, because if you buy one and you've got five years later, that's pretty good. And if you're sensible about it, you'll wait until the end of June and you'll dig up your little clump and you'll place them a little bit further apart so they make more bulbs, and then you get a bigger clump.
I think you're speaking as East Anglians when it comes to South Haze, because I actually find that quite difficult here.
Oh, do you?
but
Because
it's-
we're very wet in the winter. And
Yes.
I don't think it likes being so wet in the winter,
Yeah.
but also we go quite hot in the summer because we're in the centre of England. And I've lost a lot of South Haze after that very warm spring. And I'm trying to work out whether it's Narcissus fly or whether the bulbs just didn't proliferate. So
Oh,
I
it's not.
find that Snowdrops change. The ones that do well in East Anglia don't necessarily do well for me. I do very well with a lot of grey-leaved ones You know, the ones I'm not quite as fond of because they're a bit big and butch. But
like Kite.
yeah.
I am encouraged that South Hayes might do well in East Anglia, because while I am still resisting getting any snowdrops, it isn't starting. I'm not going down that slippery slope.
I'm starting it for you. I'm going to give you green tear because you've always liked green tear, and
I
I've got
have.
enough.
It's a strong one, green tear.
It is a good
I mean,
flower.
I've only got 3 left because every time anybody comes to the garden, they want it. And it's one of those snowdrops that proliferates and puts a gap between itself and the next snowdrop, which some of them do. And then you feel you've got to dig it up for people. So all the people I've given it to have actually got better clumps than I have. So
I do remember, Alan, it must have been, was it 2 years ago, a snowdrop event at yours, and obviously this year has fallen to the pandemic, but whenever I was at your snowdrop day, South Hayes was definitely one of the ones that really stood out, and I somehow managed to resist buying it, which I think I deserve a medal for. But I'm glad to know that in East Anglia I may have success when I eventually succumb.
I hope it wasn't on my stall you resisted buying it for.
Probably. I did so well that day.
Very interested to write up a garden in the Telegraph, and it was Jo Hines's garden at
lovely.
on Dartmoor, and of course she's got acid soil, and it's amazing that she does really well with a lot of the green leaf snowdrops, because you always imagine snowdrops are limestone lovers, but actually she grows them really well.
Well, I think when Joe did his talk about the colour in snowdrops, Joe Sharman,
yes,
he said that the yellow ones, I'm going to get it wrong, I'm sure, but I think it's because they can't take up a certain mineral from the soil, and so on more clay soils, yellow ones do better.
I struggle with a lot of the smaller yellows, like Sanders Eye.
Right.
Yes. But I've always thought perhaps it was too wet here. But when I went to Primrose Hill in Lucan in Ireland, where they have masses of rain, I went into the garden and they had a big, tall galvanized tub, about 6 foot long and about 3 foot wide, an old sort of cattle trough type thing, raised off of the ground, probably about 3 feet high, absolutely wall to wall with Sanders Eye.
Ah.
Yeah. Well, that's about as yellow I can go. I can't get much more yellow than that one, or those two, I should say, because there are 2 there. That one is Dryad Gold, Sovereign.
Yes.
And that one is Dryad Gold Medal, 2 from Anne Wright's breeding, which has produced an awful lot of yellow snowdrops so far. I don't think I cut any others. I was going to cut a Lady Elphinstone, but I forgot. She's very low down, so I probably overlooked her.
My best yellow is Sarah Dumont, actually.
Is it?
I think the thing about yellows is that you have to put them in a brighter light.
Yes.
They
like the sun.
Yes, they do like the sun more than the others.
Belvedere Gold is perfectly happy in woodland conditions, I find. Because it really is in shadow, whereas the lovely clump of Golden Fleece, which, talking about prices, was about £300 for the bulb, but 2 years later, that clump is worth 3,900.
Yes, it's a strong one. And I think it was very well named, Golden Fleece, emphasis on the fleece. Because one went on eBay for a huge sum.
It was something like £1,300 or
£1,390, I think.
Huge amount.
Yeah,
I got 3 flowers on mine. I'm very pleased. It's been in a year, I think, and it's produced 3 flowers, and it's bulking up.
And it will next year, because mine had, I think, 2 flowers last year, and Thordis has got the picture. This year, I think there are 13.
Oh, there was 14. There was one hidden at the back.
Oh, was that?
Yes, I enlarged the picture, Brian. I was so intrigued. I enlarged the picture, and there was one bud sort of hidden behind one of the flowers at the back. So there's 14 in actual fact.
But so there may not be 14 bulbs, because snowdrops do produce more than one scape from a bulb. So we should see when I have a look.
You have to be very careful because people come to the garden. And I always remember I had a wonderful clump of lapwing and it had about 20 flowers on it. And it is still cornishes, a lovely sort of inner mark. It's a lyre mark, I suppose you'd call it. It's a lovely thing and it has real poise in the garden. And somebody said, could I have one? And I thought, well, I'd have to dig one up. So I dug one up. Enormous bulb with about 7 stems on it. And immediately the rest went backwards. Yeah. So sometimes you think you've got a lot of bulbs because you've got a lot of flower, but actually you haven't.
I never, ever dig snowdrops up when they're growing.
You're very good.
I can remember Richard saying that when they had yaffle, they took it down to the RHS halls to be judged. He dug it up, put it back, and it'd all gone.
Yes, I've had trouble with yaffle actually just disappearing. I've got one bulb left, and then I think 2 years ago I had about 30 flowers. I think it could be narcissus fly.
So narcissus fly, is it obviously a problem with Galanthus?
It is, and last spring was such a glorious spring. They emerged early, and I always remember reading about Alec Gray, the bulb breeder who gave us all the miniatures like Tater Tate and so many Sun Disc, Jumbly. You know, he was a cut flower grower and he wanted to produce early flowers, and he came up, all his flowers were miniatures and they were no good for the cut flower, but they're absolutely wonderful. And he writes in his book about being out one sunny afternoon between 10 and about 2 with a badminton bat and swatting 400 narcissus flies, and they're rather like bumblebees. And they make a high-pitched whine, which is very good if you've got good hearing. But I was a premature twin and I've got terrible hearing. My father called me cloth ears, so I can't hear them. And I think they did quite a lot of damage last year. And what they do is that if they fly over and drop the eggs like dam busters. Now, it's said that they only drop their eggs if they can smell damage on the bulb underneath. Which is interesting. I can't prove that that's right, but I do definitely have areas where they disappear.
I don't think it can be right because John Morley goes around swatting them above the beds that are growing the chips on. Well, they're not damaged bulbs, are they?
Well, I don't know, but I do know one thing. They are much more prevalent in sunny spots than they are in shady spots. And when Beth Chatto was bulking up a Narcissus Cedric Morris, she had the pots in a very sunny area and she lost most of her stock to narcissus fly in 1 year. So she always advised people to put the bulb in shade.
Yeah.
And it doesn't actually like being in shade as much as it does in sun, but it's more protected from narcissus fly, if that makes sense.
Yes. Well, the other thing is swift moth, isn't it, Val?
Yeah,
because moth is very simple. I planted the front garden here, which is very small, with fairly ordinary snowdrops, but different ones like primroses by the gate and things like that.
Yes.
And the swift moth must have flown right through the middle of the bed because all the ones in the middle.
Have you got herbaceous in amongst them?
The whole garden.
Grantias and asters apparently are very bad for swift moths.
Right.
And a lot to swift moths. I'm actually taking up a clump of astrantia to make way for a Philadelphus. And I don't mind taking up astrantias because I know that they do harbour swift moth. And actually, my garden is all about snowdrops. But don't tell him that.
Mark Brown, who was the Galanthus National Collection holder in France, wasn't he?
Yes.
He said that geraniums also are attractive to swift moths, the smell of the geranium leaves.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I took an awful lot of them out. I mean, I had a lot of geraniums.
Is this hardy geraniums?
Yeah.
Yes. So
it's not elegant.
Yeah. Yes.
I do love the idea of Galanthophiles just standing above their snowdrops with like one of these electric rackets ready to defend them.
I know that Richard Bashford does it. And he makes
Yes.
little covers, little mesh covers
That's
on
right. Yeah.
tripods for his very special ones. And I'm thinking that that's what I've got to do over my specials, because I've got quite a lot of really special things here. And I'm thinking, I probably should try and cover them in some way.
There's a market opportunity here for somebody who can make mesh cloches for Galanthophiles.
Yes, yes.
But they have to be smart.
Yes.
Oh,
Well, I
that's
don't know
the
that they have to be smart for me.
Safety is the main concern.
We've been introduced to a couple of the flowers that are festooning your room, Brian. What would you like to show us
Right.
next?
Well, when Richard did his chipping, Richard is
this
custodian. Yeah,
Or
no,
Hobbs?
Richard Hobbs.
Yeah,
He's
sorry.
custodian of a plot of land which is near Norwich, which was used by a very strange character called Hayrick Greatorex. Not only did he have a strange name, but he was a really odd man. And he is the first person who was breeding snowdrops in the country. So Norfolk has a claim to fame there. And he crossed the single Galanthus nivalis, which everybody thinks is native to England, but undoubtedly isn't, and the double form. And he raised lots of them, which were called the Shakespeare ladies. So the Greatorex plot to me is quite an exciting place to be. And we've been fortunate enough to go round the Greatorex plot with Richard a couple of times, once in 2009. And we found some different snowdrops. I took my friends David Quinton and John Finch with me, who were up for the day, and they each found one, and I found one too. And that's why I was showing you this picture very first thing, because this is one that we found there. And you can notice that it's got what people would normally say stem, which is a scape. And from the top of the scape, you've got two flowers rather than just the one. So it's a snowdrop twin. And we named it, it's very reliable. As soon as it's a mature bulb, it always has two flowers like that. And I named it after a few years with Richard's permission, and I called it Saraband. And that drawing is by Frida Cox from her book. And I called it Saraband to remember that it was from the place, which was Snowdrop Acre, and it was found by Richard and Brian and David. Unfortunately, I couldn't get John in as well, so that had to be missed out.
Silent J.
So that's a Norfolk snowdrop, and here is another.
Can I say something about Greatorex?
Yeah.
Can I? Greatorex actually came from a very well-to-do family,
Yes,
and
very.
yes, and his Hertfordshire house was eventually bought by David Beckham, and became Beckingham Towers. It's Hertfordshire, I believe, isn't it? I can't remember the real name of that house. But when the Snowdrop book was coming out in the early 1990s, nobody knew what H.A. Greatorex's Christian name was. And Ruby came into the London show and said, I know what H.A. Greatorex's name is. And all our jaws dropped, the first name. And we went over to the cafe and we said, well, tell us what it is, Ruby. And she said, I'm not telling you. She said, you'll have to buy the book. And she didn't have. We had to wait for the book to get this astonishing name of Hayrick, Heyrick, from the book. Anyway, that's my story. That's my Greatorex story. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think his father or grandfather was actually the organist at somewhere like St. Paul's Cathedral.
Yes, he went to a very posh school, but I can't remember which one.
I
Of the top
can't
public
remember.
schools.
I can't remember. He was a very odd man. He lived in a sort of what you might call a bungalow, except it was based on a railway carriage. It was a very strange affair, apparently. And nobody can find a picture of him, which we're desperately trying to do.
Oh, interesting.
Another
Anyhow.
one who likes to hide behind shrubs, perhaps.
Yeah.
He must have. Yes. Carry on, Brian. Sorry.
Go on.
No, you carry on, because otherwise we'll run out of time. And you want to cut those snowdrops for nothing, and they'll be on my conscience.
No. One of the differences that you will find in snowdrops is that some of them have outer petals and inner petals, which are virtually the same length. And this is called peculiform, or poculiform, I should say it properly, poculiform. And it refers to the shape of a cup, which I presume is if you turn it upside down. I've never entirely understood it. And this is one that was found in Linford, which is also in Norfolk, by another Norfolk Galanthophile, I suppose you'll call him now, Guy Jack Barker, who Alan knows. And so this is a Linford pock. And when it's not in the sun, you see it's very, try and get it down there. It's very nice how it hangs. It's almost like a bell, which I think is very, very nice. So, and also going back to the Greatorex plot, I was very lucky because I have become a snowdrop immortal, as Val probably knows, because Joe Sharman and Richard found a snowdrop at the Greatorex plot, which they hadn't got a name for, and they asked me if they could name it for me. So I was dead chuffed.
Oh.
Very embarrassed. Very embarrassed.
When we had the Immortals lunch at Avon Bulbs, which I wrote up, all the people went there. Yvonne Hay, Ronald Mackenzie, all the people, Veronica Cross was there, Carolyn Alwas was there, all the people that had snowdrops named after them. And there's a picture on the internet, you can look it up. And Alan Street named his snowdrop Alan's Treat, rather than Alan '(S) and Treat. So they wouldn't let him be in the picture. And it was quite funny. There was a big debate about whether he should be in the picture, and he was cast aside.
Oh.
So I took a picture of him with his Alan's Treat at the lunch, because it was deemed not to be his name.
I think that's rather clever.
If you name a snowdrop, or make sure you stick to your name. Oh yes, I love Alan's Treat. I love Alan's Treat.
Yeah, and I mean, it's the markings on it which are so fine.
Yes, and it hangs so well in the garden, doesn't it? It's like Alan. It's upright, dapper, and slim.
Yes.
I say that
And
with no
jolly.
jealousy.
And very jolly.
Sounds like it could have been named after our Alan.
Yes, it does.
I am beginning to wonder why I've done this to myself, though. This is
Yes.
trying to resist snowdrops, sitting with three Galanthophiles, one of whom has cut some of the most exquisite snowdrops from their garden, isn't really the way to do it.
And this one, you don't often look at it from underneath because it's such a short one.
Yes.
But it is. Val?
Well, I think it's Godfrey Owen, but there's
Of course
Margaret
it is.
Biddulph as well.
I love
can't tell the
Godfrey
difference.
It's Godfrey Owen.
Yes, Godfrey Owen. And I talk to lots of Galanthophiles when I'm writing, and you ask them what their favourite snowdrop is, and Godfrey Owen comes up again and again and again, and Diggory does, which is another East Anglian one with a sort of bulbous bottom, and not that I'm casting aspersions on the person who found it, please. Mrs. McNamara, which is the Irish one, and apparently I've just found out that came from Limerick. She was Dylan Thomas's mother-in-law.
Mother-in-law, yeah.
Mother-in-law, yes. And I wrote about it, and a relative wrote to me and said, no, it came from Limerick. So I've got more information on that. And Godfrey Owen and A.E. Bowles. So the same ones come up again and again and again. And Godfrey Owen, oh, you must have that, Thordis.
It is a wonderful snowdrop. I'm just trying to find what I've done. I don't think I can have picked her.
No, well, I've got her, but she doesn't do the right thing.
What, Mrs. Mack?
Margaret, oh no, Margaret Starr, sorry. Mrs. Mack is a wonderful snowdrop because she's always out of us.
Margaret Starr has to settle down. Like all the bulbs that are very special in the snowdrop world, they really have to have a mature bulb to do their thing properly.
Yes.
I mean, I saw the original clump at John Morley's. I mean, we're very fortunate because John's a dear friend, and we're in a normal year, we'd be going once a week or even more perhaps at this time of the year.
Yes.
So I'm really missing it.
Yes.
We saw the original clump that he had of Margaret Starr, and it was stunning. It really was a massive snowdrop, and it's called Margaret Starr because it has, when it's mature, 5 outer petals rather than the 6 of Godfrey Owen. But when it's young, it has 3, and then it grows up a bit, and it's a teenager, and it has 4, and eventually you do get 5. So
well, I'm hoping
you have to be patient.
Yeah,
And feed it, of course.
I'm so known for my patience.
Yeah.
Well,
But you have to feed them, of course, because people think they're like hedges, that they should never be fed.
when I feed mine all the time.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
well, that's something that, I mean, let's assume that a huge amount of people who are watching this probably are in the Galanthophile category. But if they are aspiring Galanthophiles and they want to know how to get the best out of their bulbs, what should they be doing on the food regime front then, Brian?
Well, generally, at this time of the year, I will water them with a liquid seaweed-based fertilizer at half strength. And I say half strength because I water them quite a lot at this time of the year, just to sort of keep them going and bulk up the bulbs. I also, when I repot, I give them sulfate of potash, which will build the bulb up. And people will probably poo-poo it, but I also, when I repot, give them rock dust, because I think it has traces of minerals that the roots will take up. And my yellows are getting better since I started doing it. So I think that's a good thing to do.
I approve of all that. I have a slightly different way of doing it, that at this time of year, although I'm organic, I do put Vitax Q4 on my snowdrops, which is a high potash feed. But then when they start to lose their flower and go into leaf, I go on to a nitrogen-rich 6X, which I sprinkle around because that keeps them in leaf longer. And I think that's the secret with all woodlanders, is to keep them into keep them in leaf as long as possible. But I also buy seaweed food to water on. But there's a problem, because when I come to use it, the best beloved has used it all up in the previous summer. So I haven't put seaweed on them yet. But this could be the year.
Oh, wonderful.
I do love that. I mean, Alan, it's one of my favourite things when we do these podcasts to see Alan Gray making notes. And I don't know. I don't know a couple of notes here. I don't know exactly how many of the snowdrops we've talked about so far you've been writing down. Do you have a lot of them, or are there any that are gradually getting onto your wish list, Alan?
Well, I made a couple of notes here. Saraband, I'd like to get, Brian, for to add to your list. And the other one is Margaret Starr. And whilst we're talking about snowdrops from our dear friend Brian here, I just have to say that he's one of the most generous men that I know. And in actual fact, a lot of snowdrop dealers, when you buy a bulb, you will get a bulb, and you're more than likely not to get just a bulb with Brian, but you're likely to get a teenager and a juvenile in there as well.
And you know why?
Well, I know why, because you said to me one day, well, they're only bulbs, aren't they?
They are. They're only bulbs, and they increase.
Yeah.
And also, they like company. They
Yes.
don't like to be on their own, and they will grow better if you've got 2 or 3 of them. And it's much nicer to buy a plant, and the next year you've got a little clump.
Yes. I use those square lily pots for anything very special. And I mix up gritty compost. And just to start them off, I put them in square lily pots because we used to have a cat. And if you put a new snowdrop in, she seemed to have radar if it was an expensive one, and she would go and scratch it up. So I started using these baskets, excuse me. And I've got Amy Doncaster in one of these
wonderful
baskets, and I didn't get to split her up because she's under a rose bush, and she's come up like a Vesuvius of bulbs. There must be 80 or 90 Amy Doncasters in this one pot. But you know, she doesn't seem to mind it. Even the bulbs that are at the top are flowering. But I have made a big note to say to myself, you must, in July, get under that rose bush and split those poor bulbs up. They like being crammed in.
Yeah, but when they are vigorous, they're rather like nerines or nerines, however you say
Yes.
it. And they push their bulbs to the top, and the bulb is sitting above the soil, and the roots are just touching into the soil.
Yes, it's amazing.
Done that with me. I mean, it's just so prolific.
Yes, they do like, quite a lot of them do like being crammed in.
Yeah.
And Bowles, E.A. Bowles, that famous Galanthophile, used to say, stir them up, split them up. I actually, if they're happy, and I record the number of flowers every year, I'm such a nerd that I go around and say 20 flowers. And then if I go the next year and there's only 7, I think I must do something. But if there's 30 flowers, I think, leave it alone. It's doing well on its own. I don't do them routinely. And I don't propagate anything.
Talking about the Snowdrop E.A. Bowles, that's the only one that I've had a complete disaster with. I started off with about 3 flowers, and then I think I had 1, and then the whole lot disappeared. And I don't know whether it was swift moth or narcissus fly, but I suspect it was one or the other. But when I investigated, the bulbs were quite squishy and black. Can you tell me what it is?
Well, I don't know, because I find bulbs like that, and I've just had a clump of called Hans Gluck something, and I dug up the bulbs and they were brown, and that's definitely when you've got brown stained bone. That's a fungal thing called Stagginus sporum.
And
that's really bad news for an organic gardener like me. So I dig them up and then I bed them out singly, and I have what's called a sick bay. I have 2 sick bays. One up.
I have a hospital.
And I put them in there, and they either do or they don't. And if they survive 2 or 3 years and look healthy, I bring them back into the sort of proper garden again. So it could be a fungal rot. I've also found bulbs like that I think have been suffered with narcissus fly. It's very, very hard to tell. But have you still got a E.A. Bowles?
No, I've lost it.
Well, I have to send you one.
Thank you.
But I won't dig it up now. I will dig it up. And if I forget, Alan, please nag me, because you say these things and then you don't always write them down and you forget.
Well, that's true.
But I've got 2 clumps, and they're doing well for me. An E.A. bulb is one that does well in quite damp places here.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
It's one of the better ones.
Maybe it didn't like my dry soil, because we are quite dry here.
Yeah.
It's a plicate snowdrop, which means it's got wide green leaves, central midrib, pale midrib, and that little pleat underneath, right at the base, which is why it's plicate, pleated. And all those plicates, in my opinion, prefer a damper, cooler site.
Yes.
Right.
Do in my garden.
Quite right. I think you're quite right on that. Because I was going to say E.A. Bowles really does like a moist situation, and it will grow enormously well there. And I've put it in the best bit I can.
Yes. Well, it's a wonderful thing, really globular, stately. Mine are not as stately as they usually are. And I think that's a dry spring. It's a good tip, actually, to look at the foliage of your snowdrops when you buy them. The hybrids are quite strong, but when you look at Elwesii with its grey foliage, if you buy a plant, an ordinary herbaceous plant with grey foliage, you put it in sun, don't you? Well, that's the same with the grey leaf snowdrops. They will tolerate a bright position much better than the plicates.
Right plants, right place. That's the whole thing, isn't it? Yeah.
Time seems to be hurtling on a pace, and I feel like there are yet more snowdrops surrounding Brian that we haven't talked about.
Yes, I must shut up. Sorry, Brian.
I must just show this one because we've already mentioned Joe Hines at Higher Cherrybeer.
Yes.
And so I ought to show you this, which is
Wind
Flying
turbine.
Away,
Yes.
which is her wind turbine.
Yes.
Well, I think actually it was given to her, wasn't it, from somebody in the village who said they'd got a snowdrop by the gatepost, and was she interested?
Right. Oh, I didn't know that. I knew
Yeah.
it was associated with her.
Yeah, so she went to see them, and they very kindly said, "Oh, you can have it." So she took one or two, and she's since bred another couple and named them after Daisy and, is it Jake?
I
Her
think
son?
so. Her children. Yes.
Yeah.
But I haven't seen those. I've got wind turbine, but it's not very weather resistant for me. We're very cold here and exposed.
And I was also going to say that I think this year, Val, they're all short.
Yes, I've had a lot of trouble with Primrose Warburg. It's very miserable.
Yeah.
Yellow, which is normally lovely here.
Well, I thought I'd better pick up a variety of things. So this is another one, which is what is called a spiky.
Is it Alburgh Claw?
No. The Arnott Claw, please.
Oh, so sorry.
Correct pronunciation. It's like, I hate it when people say Sam Arnott.
You can tell he was a teacher.
Yeah. But this tiny little thing is from Anglesey Abbey. It's Anglesey double spiky.
Yes.
And I don't think it gets much longer than that, whereas the Arnott Claw can get twice that length and more. Which is
not
quite
here,
incredible.
sadly.
So that's a different shape.
You know, Amy Doncaster got very cross with Roy Lancaster when he called S. Arnott Sam Arnott. And apparently she was wearing her carpet slippers and with her stick, and she jumped up and down and waved her stick at him.
Oh, wonderful.
His wife wouldn't have been as, I don't know what quite the phrase it was. His wife wouldn't have been as familiar as that. It's excellent, she said. She still gave him a bulb.
Now this one, and this is why I've got a black jumper on, you can see those sticking up. They're like bunny ears, aren't they?
Oh, yes.
So this is a Charlockii, and this is green tips and a nice green mark as well. This is Oncle Oscar, which is
I don't know that one.
From Rudy Bauer.
That's extraordinary.
I think Uncle Oscar could come your way, Val.
Oh, thank you. Because I have one that Colin gave.
Just writing it down.
Trois Jardins, and it's got 3 bunny's ears.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
well, that's
it was
nice.
given to me by Colin. It's bulking up, but not probably
Lovely.
enough to do very much with it at the moment for a couple of years.
I've got so many. I had to actually write them down because I knew I was going to get in a muddle.
But they all look so different indoors.
They do. They're not at all the same. I thought I'd better show you that some have very long pedicels. This is the pedicel here, and they hang nicely, and lots of them are called something dancer, but I think this is the original, which is Percy Picton, named after the breeder of asters, or Michaelmas daisies, I should say, shouldn't I?
Nympho dragon, Brian.
Well, yeah, well, no.
Magnet's got quite a long one as well, and those ones with long pedicels, they move and dance in the wind.
And that's why lots of them are called something dancer, aren't they?
Yes, yes.
And then there's also, I think this is the one. This is another one that's got 2 pedicels, and it's a dancer. But it's actually, I think this one, this must be from 1 drop or 2, which is a most peculiar drop.
Yes, it's from Avon, isn't it?
It's from
Avon.
I rather like it because it's, yes, it is 1 drop.
Yes.
Or 2.
Yes, I've got that. But again, in the garden, it doesn't fly, so it doesn't look.
And there you see, can you see the...
Oh, yes, the split ovary.
No, it's not a split ovary, Val. It's a split receptacle. You
I'm
can't
sorry.
see people's ovaries. Richard Hobbs always says you can't see ovaries. It's the receptacle that they're in. So that's another difference that you can spot.
Do you know,
There are
I
lots-
thought I knew how varied snowdrops were, but this is astonishing.
Oh, they're
This is
a terrific variety. And what happened was when they brought the different species in, Nivalis and Plicatus and Elwesii, they hybridized, and that's what caused the variety. When the species
that's all.
together.
And that's why the Greater X plot at Snowdrop Acre has got such a diversity of snowdrops, because for over 70 years now, they've all been doing their own thing, being moved about by rabbits and breeding and all sorts of things.
What was that one you just had, Brian? That is just...
Well, this is another one that comes from Anglesey Abbey, which is in Cambridgeshire. And this is the most perfect double, because it is so nice. It's Ailwyn, named after Sir Ailwyn Bourne.
Yes, okay.
Melanie Bourne, Ailwyn Bourne.
Yes.
So that's named after Lord Fairhaven, who has wonderful collection also, not just at Anglesey Abbey, but also at Kirtling Tower, which is another...
I've got Kirtling Tower. I bought that at a sale. And it's doing...
Yes, that's a dear little thing, that
Yes.
is, isn't it? It's got
It's
such
a
a lovely
tall
shape.
stem with a little, almost like a little bell on top.
Yeah.
But Brian's going to correct me and say it's not a bell.
No, I don't. No. Would I dream of correcting
Oh,
that?
look.
This
What a delicate
one.
darling.
Now, this is how things like South Hayes should look when they're outside, because this is from the stable of the wonderful late Veronica Cross.
Yes.
And this is Long John Silver. And I was interested to see today that this one hasn't raised its skirts, has it?
No, it's got thick petals, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Probably weighs
And
it down
also,
a bit.
it's got such a lovely shape to the petal. It's quite ridged, which is quite nice. But my favourite of all the trim type snowdrops, because they were all developed from one which was called Trim, which came from Westbury on Trim, was it, Val?
Yes, it was Westbury on Trim. It was Barbara somebody, but I can't remember. Of course, it was the first pixie hat.
Yes. Well, this is my absolute favourite. And I would be devastated if I lost this. This is Trimmer. And you can see that actually on Trimmer, not only has it got a very dark mark, but near the base, because it's all upside down in the snowdrop world.
Yes.
Up here, there's a very slight paler green mark as well. And it's a nice fat snowdrop, which is probably why I like it.
Yeah, there's so many different seedlings now. I mean, one of the things I always do in my garden is I don't remove the seed heads. And then every year I go around and I look for new seedlings. And I found a green virescent seedling in my meadow bit this year, which I've marked. And then I've also got some trim seedlings that are a bit unusual, which I've also marked. So I look for seedlings. I never deadhead them.
And
So
this is what Val means by virescent. This is
Yeah.
a virescent snowdrop. And this comes from Biddulph Grange, from Simon Biddulph. It's called Margaret Biddulph.
It's not Biddulph Grange. I'm sorry to step in. It's Rodmartin Manor.
That's right. Rodmartin
It's very
Manor.
near me, so it's one place I always go every snowdrop time. In
Val just got her own back for the ovary comment, Brian.
Yes, obviously.
Touche.
I always get it muddled up because I know it's Simon Biddulph, and
It's
I
Simon
usually think
Yes.
Biddulph
And,
Manor.
and which one is that? Is that Margaret or Claude?
This is Margaret.
Or
I
Claude
think-
is better.
Claude is much better, but
Yeah.
I think the Narcissus fly got to Claude.
Well, will you let me remind me, and I will send you one in the summer because I've got quite a lot of Claude. I've had him quite a number of years because Simon is a friend of mine, has been for a long time. So
Nice man.
yes,
Lots
very
and lots of
reserved.
Claude.
British.
We have very few minutes left.
Well, I must show you blueberry tart then very quickly.
Yes.
This is another double found by Allen Street in the town of, or village of Blueberry in the churchyard. And it's called Blueberry Tart because it shows its skirts.
Yes. And Allen Street always comes up with wonderful names.
Oh,
and he named one of them Ding Dong because at the time the Avon cosmetics advert was on,
yes.
and you get the ding dong at the beginning of it. So he named one of the Snowdrops rather than Avon Cosmetics Ding Dong. So, you know, he lots of lovely snowdrops there.
Yeah.
Can I
Clever
give a tip about disease that might be interesting? Very quick tip. If you get a diseased snowdrop, and John Grimshaw told me this, bless him, you dig up the snowdrop because you don't want it to spread. And a diseased snowdrop doesn't look right. It's got a twist in the leaves quite often. It's not looking that happy. It's probably got brown tips on the leaves. You're sort of thinking, is it? Well, dig it up is my advice. Always dig them up so it doesn't spread. And then in the hole, you put another sort of plant. It might be a primrose, it might be a cyclamen, and that stops you putting another snowdrop in the same hole and possibly seeing that one as well.
An excellent tip, that.
Thank you.
Brian, in our final couple of minutes, are there any others that you want to have their moment in the spotlight before we say goodbye?
My favourite snowdrop all my snowdrops is Green of Hearts, which is a tall snowdrop. It's got a heart-shaped green mark, but it comes up through a maidenhair fern that doesn't die down in my garden. That's it. And it's spread a little wider. In the garden, it would be a bit tighter. And It comes up and it gets to about a foot high, and it comes through this, the remnants of a maidenhair fern. And, you know, it's wonderful. I should never, ever separate it from its maidenhair fern because it's thoroughly entangled in it. It's just my favourite thing every year.
What we really haven't talked about, I know we're going to come to an end, is the inner marks on snowdrops.
Yes.
Because they're all different. And this one is Washfield Colesbourne.
Much easier than Colesbourne.
Yeah. And then there's lots with faces like that. Can you see that face?
Yeah.
I don't know which one that is.
I'll tell you in a second.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's not that. It's
It's because they look different. We're not being dumb. Come inside, they go.
I think what that one is.
They've got whoopee cushions underneath them.
Yes.
Well, I know what this tells us is we need to do it all again next year. We need to have...
I'm not picking them all again.
and I failed. I don't think I'll do any better next year. And I do thank Brian for picking his, because I really was, you know, I'm going to send pictures.
We are eternally grateful. We knew that this would be a riot. We knew it would probably be longer than any other podcast, but it has been as much fun as we anticipated. What a treat. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome. It was very great fun.
Yes, it's lovely to see Brian because I wouldn't normally see him, this year.
Not this year. We won't see anybody.
No, we won't see anybody.
Well, here's to next year and next year's snowdrop season. Thank
Absolutely.
you. And happy gardening.
Well.
Are you ready to be on the podcast, Lily? Are you watching birdies outside?
I couldn't see. The sun is so bright. I had to find somewhere to sit which was light. And then, of course, it's...
Hello. Hello.
Yeah.
A goose or a duck you've got by your telly, Thordis?
Please meet
Terrible.
Finzi the Pelican.
Oh, isn't that lovely? I like him.
Alan, you may or may not remember me buying him at a Chelsea flower shop.
I do. Here we have Thordis. Oh, I've forgotten. Maria Fredrickson.